There's one part about identity, how that relates to it. Spiritual tech goes beyond that. I want to spend some time talking about this idea that caused me to choose spiritual tech as the name for this endeavor that I'm on. The core concept behind it is about connecting people. I'm going to spend some time in more videos talking about all of it all together. The one point I want to talk about with this video in particular is the concept of identity and what that means at a micro and macro level. There's three elements to this, on both cases, micro and macro. There's the concept of zero identity, one identity, and an infinity amount of identities. We're going to talk about it all together, right? So if we draw this on a spectrum of 0 and infinity, and 1 being someplace closer to 0, but you know, just in general, someplace on the spectrum. On a macro level, right, if we all had the same identity or the same perspective, personality, persona, mindset, we kind of wouldn't like each other, right? It's essentially saying if all of us were one and the same, what would life look like on Earth? And there's some dystopian type of stories that kind of go over this scenario, and everyone's sort of brainwashed into a single thing, right? There's no creativity, there's no like zest of life, and kind of on the opposite side of everyone having a very, very unique identity, right? Where no one is thinking or sharing concepts at all. 8 billion people, you know, all having their own perspective on life. We're not really there. I think that yes, everyone is unique in their own sense, but what we have instead is a set of cultures, societies, civilizations, groups of collective ideals, beliefs, and values that kind of link us together, and we choose these based off of what we believe in, you know, and what resonates with us. When you think about politics, religion, science, when you think about any sort of community of interest or practice or any sort of shared beliefs, all of them kind of form a group that we identify with. Like ethnic or cultural groups also kind of fall into this. And once we have a group of people who kind of think and do and act and like feel the same, there's some collective identity that we have, you know, based off of this. And in general, right, to summarize what we just talked about, having one identity on a macro level is kind of bad, right? We don't want that. Having an infinite number is bad too, because we kind of have a hard time connecting and like talking to each other. What we have instead is a somewhere in the middle, some range of groups of people, some number that we say this is a healthy number of groups that kind of spurs creativity between, you know, interdisciplinary, intercultural, everything collaboration, and also gives us enough grounding that we're not feeling like we're all isolated or on our own island or in our own world or otherwise on our own wavelength. So on a macro level, we have some number, not one, not infinity, some number, right? On a micro level, I want to go over a bad scenario first. And if you think about the spectrum as a circle, where 0 and infinity kind of meet. On an individual level, if you have no identity, right, there's some meaning of that where you have an infinite number of identities, right? Because if you have no identities, you're kind of like on the fence, you can be swayed, you know, one way or the other. You kind of choose your personality based off of the environment or people you're around. That's very different from actually having no identity. If you have no identity, then you don't choose to have an identity at any given time. So I want to highlight that this is a terrible representation of that, and we're not going over this perspective on this. What we want instead is to have the same spectrum as a linear fashion where 0 and infinity are on opposite sides. So similar to our macro, on our micro level, what we want as an individual is essentially to have one identity, right? We want to have one identity that kind of unifies all the things we believe in, all of the things that we want in our lives, and all the things that categorize us as individuals. What we have instead generally is sort of on the macro level, we have a few identities that we kind of take on given the people around or the environment we're in. I'll just give me as an example, right? If I'm talking to my family, right, I usually have a different voice than if I'm talking with some friends, or even within friends, there's like different ways I talk with different friends. When I'm at school or at work or in a professional setting or presentation type of setting, I talk a different way. I'm definitely talking a different way on YouTube, even though at my core, like I'm definitely the same person in all these settings. It's just the way that my identity manifests is different. On some level, we all have some form of multiple identities that we take on that are triggered by environment and people, but generally those multiple identities kind of stem from the same single identity, right? What I want to highlight here is that as we sort of learn more about ourselves, right, and the whole goal of Vedanta, right, is to know yourself, and by knowing yourself, you kind of know how the universe works and you know how others operate. And one of the core teachings in Vedanta, right, is that we're all manifestations of the same consciousness, and by all of us being manifestations of the same consciousness, under the hood, we kind of have the same identity. And the reason why I bring up zero identity as a concept here is because the identity that we think we have, this body, this mind that we operate in this world with, it's an illusion in the sense that we get attached to our life, the way we were born, the way we were raised up, everything that we've learned and accrued in this lifetime is sort of just one attribute of our true selves, but our true selves, right, doesn't have an identity, or that identity is one and the same with the collective consciousness that we all come from. And I won't use that as the basis for explaining anything further. That's just my interpretation of my beliefs as a Hindu, as like a follower in the philosophy of Vedanta, right? So for me, right, my goal is to have no identity as having zero identity, meaning that the identity that I have in this lifetime is not the identity that I identify with. It's the identity that I identify with is the collective consciousness that we are all connected to under the hood, right? On the micro and macro levels, there's the opposing goal, right? So on a macro level, you want to have as many identities as possible to spur collaboration, to spur creativity, to spur engagement in the world, and just advancement and evolution of ideas and concepts. On an individual level, you want to have as little different personalities or identities as possible. Or if you have multiple, they're all stemming from the same core root identity. And if you have these opposing sides, having multiple identities, having as little as possible, right? And what I want to highlight as this relates back to the name of SpiritualTech that I'm using is that as a collective, right, we're all connected on some level. The communities that we're part of, the identities that we take on, these are the things that connect us. And the spiritual aspect of SpiritualTech is just that. It's supposed to be on a social level, we're all connected and we're all sharing some experience in some way. And being able to identify what way technologies apply to in your life and how that may relate to others will help you use technology effectively in the groups that you're a part of, but also sharing that knowledge with others based off of the ways that technology applies to you and your group. So that's kind of a little abstract, and maybe there's just a little tiny bit that this whole explanation got further on this struggle. The last point I want to talk about is about gamification, and I want to bring it up because I mentioned brainwashing a little bit earlier as well. The idea I want to say is that gamification is the new age of brainwashing, right? So in the past, right, brainwashing was more like propaganda. Government's trying to get us to, think or do a certain way. Communism is all about propaganda. I don't want to get into politics too much, but there's the whole history, and if you understand history and politics, then that's the thing. The reason for bringing up gamification is just to highlight that as we use technology more, it's one of the tools that corporations use to kind of get us more involved and more excited about technology. And there's good and bad aspects to it. Once we're aware about how we're using gamification and we're kind of aware of when it's happening, that's all that we really need to concern ourselves with. Everything at the end of the day is sort of brainwashing, so it's not any different from before, but the whole thing is that gamification is kind of addictive, and any sort of addiction is kind of gonna take us on a bad path, right? One of the things that I hope to do is get people aware about these concepts of identity, who they identify as, what that identity means for them, and how that identity relates to the technology that they're using. And however that looks like might cause people to want to use or change technology in their life a certain way. So just learning more about that and helping people to learn about that for themselves is how it relates back to the spiritual tech. So yeah.